Yeah, I mean, the AP poll is, and the coaches poll as well, just both polls really disrespecting USC. I mean, we've talked before on the show about how neither of the polls you can really trust, especially this early in the season. But it's at this point, I just have no words anymore. And like, I don't know. I feel like I have learned to kind of, let the polls be, ignore the SEC bias, all that stuff. But this time it's just so egregious that I feel like I can't let it go by without saying something. So USC somehow goes down in the coaches poll. Don't ask me how that happened. And then they move up only one spot from 30 to 29 in the AP poll. In the AP poll, you have Indiana ranked ahead of them. And Indiana obviously kind of struggled and squeaked out a 27-14 win over Old Dominion, which, mind you, was a 5-7 team last year and 4-4 in conference. So they're a mediocre Sun Belt team. And Indiana somehow, because of that performance, deserves a ranking ahead of USC. Again, doesn't occur to me why. And then the most egregious, in my opinion, is you have Alabama still somehow ranked after losing 31-17 to a team that went 2-10 last year. Like, who are we kidding? I just don't because I just can't understand the double standard because, on one hand, it's like, okay, Alabama's been good in recent years, so we're doing the last year revisionist history stuff to put them, in the poll at the beginning of the season, whatever. But then we don't consider last season Florida State, and all of a sudden this is not as devastating of a loss. Florida State also vaults into number 14 in the poll just out of nowhere because they beat, Alabama because they're Alabama. The Nick Saban days are over. The poll voters need to give it up. They need to stop, acting as if Alabama is a top 5 team year in and year out. A loss like that to a team that went 2-10 a year ago should have vaulted them out of the AP poll. It makes no sense. Coaches poll as well. I mean, I don't know what the coaches are seeing either. But, I mean, and it's not like Florida State put on some remarkable performance that should vault them up to 14th either. I mean, you have Thomas Castellanos, their new quarterback, completed 9 passes. Like, 9 passes beat Alabama. So in what world does Alabama or Florida State deserve to be in the poll? I just don't. Again, considering last year and considering this year, I just don't see it. I don't see how you could have watched that football game and come away with either of those teams deserving to be ranked. Again, I think Florida State could prove it with a few more games on their resume, and surely Alabama theoretically could rebound. But I just don't think there's just no world in which this makes any sense to me. But and yeah, USC continues to stay disrespected despite, the 73-13 win, most points that anybody has scored in nearly 100 years for USC. So despite all those offensive stars, and, people talk about the competition, but again, the competition these teams are playing doesn't seem to factor in, and it's, yeah. So maybe you have some additional thoughts, Matt. I assume they're very similar to mine, but just mind-boggling to me. This to me is just the worst example of SEC bias I've ever seen.
I love a good soapbox rant, not just because you delivered it really well, but because that's my wheelhouse as well. Ethan, you're basically half my age, more or less, and so my sagely advice, I don't think you'll have a problem following it, is just tune out the polls and just enjoy the sport. It just makes life so much better, because I used to get angry about polls. I used to get, really angry. I would get offended, I would be outraged, and obviously I can still rant about polls, but it's more about giving people a good product on camera here at the Voice of College Football. It's not as though I'm disturbed in terms of going about my day. It's not like that. But a lot of college football fans are and have been, and they allow this thing to matter. They allow this thing to capture their emotions. And so, folks, it's not worth it, right? We know how the sausage is made. We know the things that go into this kind of thing. The particular detail, Ethan, that slays me in terms of your well-delivered rant is that FSU, Florida State beats Alabama, and so Alabama stays in the top 25 for no good, legitimate, valid reason other than it's Alabama, the label on the soup can. And so Florida State gets the rankings boost because we thought Alabama was good. So it's just like it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. that you're always going to give certain teams, certain brand names, usually from the SEC, the benefit of the doubt. So if you beat that team, well, then obviously you're going to be ranked higher than various other teams. So yeah, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. So, a team that's ranked very highly at the beginning of the season, the punishment for losing is a slap on the wrist. It's very slight. Whereas teams that are totally off the radar but play really well, fully do their job, they don't get the same boost. They don't get the same benefit of the doubt. So, we know the deal. We know how this is done. To turn this to USC, hey, it does not matter that USC is or isn't ranked after week 1, after beating Missouri State. No one's playoff fate's being decided. No one's bowl destination is being determined. Right now it's just USC does what it needs to do, handles the things it can control, and in November, in mid-November, then we start to get interested. But we're 2.5 months away from mid-November, and USC has a lot of work to do to put itself in position to be considered for a playoff berth, to be considered for the Big Ten championship game, to be considered, for a New Year's Six spotlight game, all those prizes. The work will take care of itself. If USC puts in the work, then everything resolves itself, and that's just the way to view polls. Your team just needs to handle its business. And may I add that, in the BCS era, poll battles were really costly, and they carried more weight, because if you were number 3, sorry, you're locked out. You don't have a chance to play for a championship. USC obviously tasted the sting of that in 2003, where Oklahoma was viewed as the greatest team of all time. So even though the Sooners lost to Kansas State, Sooners still go to New Orleans for the Sugar Bowl against LSU, when of course, a USC team that blasted Oregon State should have been ranked ahead of Oklahoma, should have played LSU. So at least in the 12-team playoff era, you're not left outside the dance if you're number 3. And given the expansion from 4 teams to 12, you're not left outside the dance if you're number 5. So a lot more seats at the table, and that diminishes the significance of the polls. You don't have to be number 2. You can be number 6. You can be number 8. You're fine. And last year, Alabama, as well as South Carolina and Ole Miss, all left just outside the cut line. It's not as though you have a great argument when you say, well, darn it, we were number 12 instead of number 13, right? If that's the sliding scale, if that's the claim that you have to resort to, pretty weak sauce, right? We were 12 instead of 13. That is just a loser's argument. If you couldn't put that one to bed, being safely in the top 12, you have only yourself to blame. Alabama losing to Vanderbilt, Alabama losing to a not very good Oklahoma team, we know this. Alabama made its own bed and has to lie in it. So because of the 12-team playoff, right, we do not need to get into an uproar, in a tizzy about polls the way they used to. But Ethan, in terms of your analysis, in terms of dissecting how the sausage is made, the preconceived notions, the baked-in biases, you nailed it every step of the way. Before we get into Georgia Southern, anything else you have on the polls and any other really weird rankings, discrepancies, overweighting this team's win or underappreciating another team's win? Anything else for us?
Trojan Fight pointed out a great note in the chat. Texas A&M doesn't drop at all after struggling with UTSA. Very good point. Noticed that as well. And then another one that I noticed in the coaches poll was Tulane. Somehow Tulane is ranked ahead of USC in the coaches poll. And I mean, they beat Northwestern pretty decisively, 23-3, but that just discounts how terrible of a football team Northwestern is going to be. I mean, their quarterback threw 4 picks, and Retzloff, the new quarterback at Tulane, basically carried that team, and had all the yards, rushing and passing. It was which was only 250 total, so it was not like he had a 400-yard game. So yeah, and Retzlaff is a guy obviously that just got to Tulane like a couple months ago because of his whole scandal at BYU. So I don't know, like seeing a guy come in and carry a team despite having not been there for very long, and beating up on, oh, it's a better conference team, but it's Northwestern. Like that wouldn't exactly inspire confidence in me if I was a coach of another school who should know the ins and outs of the sport. But so it goes, I guess. This is no disrespect to Tulane. I actually think that they're one of the non-Power 4 teams that are the most likely to compete for the college football playoff. I think that they'll be solid, especially because the Mountain West has kind of, had a rough first couple of weeks. But yeah, it's just like, really, it's just another example of like they haven't done anything. And in fact, they're not a program that should be trusted over USC anyway. So it's like, whatever. But yeah, we got more football to play, like you said. And I'm sure USC is going to change a lot of minds really quickly in the next few weeks.
Yeah, would not be surprised if Northwestern is in the cellar of the Big Ten Conference, referring to Tulane, very easily beating Northwestern. Northwestern scoring just 3 points. Yeah, it does figure to be a long season in Evanston.